Joe Masseria, the boss who died at dinner. Coney Island, April 15, 1931. The evening was calm, the kind of night when New York's power players gathered over wine and lobster. Inside a small Italian restaurant, Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria sat like a king at his table, confident, untouchable, and unaware that history was about to turn against him. Across from him sat his protege, Charles Lucky Luciano, the man who owed his rise to the very boss now sitting before him. For years, Masseria ruled New York's underworld with an iron fist. His empire stretched from bootlegging to gambling, protected by fear and old-world loyalty. But times were changing, and so were the rules. Luciano smiled politely, but inside he knew the truth. Joe's old-school way of running things, the vendettas, the endless wars, had become a problem. The young generation wanted organization, structure, and peace. And to achieve it, Joe Masseria had to go. As the waiter cleared the plates, Masseria poured himself another glass of red wine. Luciano leaned forward, his tone casual. "Back in a minute, boss." He rose from his seat, straightened his tie, and walked toward the restroom. Two men stepped inside, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel and Albert Anastasia, both young, sharp-dressed, and deadly calm. Outside, Vito Genovese and Joe Adonis waited in the getaway car, engines running. Siegel's eyes locked on the target. Anastasia raised his weapon. Before Masseria could even reach for his cigar, the room erupted. When the smoke cleared, the boss of bosses lay face down in a pool of his own wine and blood. His dinner untouched, the lobster claws frozen mid-gesture. Outside, Luciano returned, expression calm, hands clean. The hit was done. The Castellamarese War, the bloodiest chapter in American Mafia history, had reached its turning point. From that moment on, New York would never be ruled by one man again. Luciano's plan for a commission, a council of families, had just begun, and Joe Masseria's death was the price of progress. Giuseppe Masseria was born in Marsala, Sicily, a place where life was hard, the soil was dry, and every man learned early that survival meant loyalty to family above all else. His father worked the fields and vineyards, while young Giuseppe watched the local men of honor settle disputes not in courts, but in whispers and gunfire. Those early lessons in power and silence shaped him long before he ever saw America. By the time he reached his 20s, Sicily was bleeding with poverty and violence. Giuseppe wanted more. He boarded a crowded ship from Palermo to New York around 1902, carrying little more than a change of clothes and a heart full of ambition. The voyage took weeks, the air thick with salt, sweat, and dreams of a new world where a clever man could rise fast. When he finally stepped onto the docks of Manhattan, he found a city booming yet divided. The streets of Little Italy were alive with voices from the old country. Vendors shouting in dialects from Naples, Palermo, and Calabria. Mothers hanging laundry above the cobblestones. Priests ringing bells from small churches wedged between bakeries and butcher shops. But behind the warmth of community, another world existed, one of debt collectors, smugglers, and enforcers. Giuseppe didn't take long to find his place. He was built for the streets, thick-set, quiet, and observant. He began working for neighborhood gambling dens, offering protection to small businesses. People learned quickly, and when Joe the boss spoke, you listened. Masseria climbed from errand boy to power broker. He understood America's game. Money and muscle ruled everything. While others clung to Sicilian traditions, he mixed the old ways with new ones, turning the Little Italy rackets into a growing empire. And by the time Prohibition came, Joe Masseria was already preparing to seize what every gangster dreamed of: control of New York's underworld. When Prohibition hit America, men like Joe Masseria saw opportunity where others saw chaos. While the government tried to dry out the country, Joe and his crew were filling warehouses with Canadian whiskey and bathtub gin, moving it through the night like liquid gold. In smoky back rooms and speakeasies hidden behind false walls, fortunes were being made. Masseria's name started to echo from Mulberry Street to the Bronx, a boss who could outthink the law and outgun the competition. But power came with blood. Every crate that crossed the Hudson carried risk. Rival crews tried hijacking his shipments, and one by one they disappeared, their bodies found in alleys or floating downriver. But the streets of New York never sleep, and every rise comes with a fall. For every crate Masseria moved, another man fell in the alleys. The police could only count the bodies, never the bullets. The city was drowning in bootleg liquor and blood. Each corpse left a message. The more power Joe took, the closer he got to war. Inside the clubs, champagne flowed and jazz roared, but behind every toast was tension. Masseria's men knew the boss was getting stronger, and so were his enemies. In the heart of Little Italy, business was never just business. Every handshake meant loyalty, and every word carried weight. Joe Masseria had turned the chaos of prohibition into a personal empire. From the Bronx to Brooklyn, his influence ran through gambling halls, speakeasies, and backroom deals sealed with cigars and wine. Among those rising under his shadow was a young Sicilian named Charles Lucky Luciano, born in Lercara Fridi, raised in New York's tenements. Luciano had a sharp mind, an American edge, and a patience most men in the underworld lacked. To Masseria, he was the perfect lieutenant, respectful, efficient, and ruthless when needed. But while Masseria clung to the old world, loyalty above all, fear as the foundation, Luciano was already looking ahead. He saw the old bosses as relics, men trapped in Sicilian pride while America was changing fast. The streets didn't need another warlord. They needed organization, structure, something built to last. The two men worked together, running whiskey, fixing elections, and buying cops by the dozen. Envelopes changed hands under dim alley lights, not just filled with money, but promises. Promises that would one day be broken. As the money piled up, so did the tension. Masseria grew paranoid, demanding more tribute, more respect, more control. He watched everyone, especially Luciano. And though they still shook hands in public, behind closed doors, both men were already planning for a future where only one of them would still be standing. Maranzano meets Luciano, 1929. In 1929, inside a quiet office on the Lower East Side, two men sat across from each other. One old-world Sicilian, the other the face of a new generation. Salvatore Maranzano spoke softly, with the patience of a man who believed in destiny. He saw something in Charlie Lucky Luciano, ambition, charm, and the hunger to rule. To Maranzano, Luciano wasn't just another street boss. He was a student, someone who could learn the old ways, then rebuild them for the new America. As the Castellamarese War tore New York apart, Maranzano began gathering men around polished tables and whispered alliances. Luciano watched, learned, and waited, his loyalty to Joe Masseria growing thinner by the day. At these meetings, the air was thick with cigar smoke and distrust. Every handshake could mean peace or a death sentence. Luciano saw how the old bosses fought for pride, while he dreamed of structure, something cleaner, colder, more profitable. Outside, the war didn't stop. Cars idled in the rain, engines humming like vultures circling. Every meeting ended with the same thought: who'll make it home tonight? Luciano's mind raced. He was walking a knife's edge, between two giants, Masseria and Maranzano, both convinced the other should die first. He began to understand that survival meant choosing the future, not the past. Later that night, Luciano sat alone in his office, the rain tapping against the window like a metronome of fate. He thought about everything Maranzano had promised: order, peace, respect. But deep down, he knew men like Maranzano were never satisfied sharing power. As smoke curled through the room, Luciano made a silent vow. The old world had to end for the new one to begin, and he would be the one to decide when. The Fall of Joe Masseria, Coney Island, 1931. The afternoon air over Coney Island was heavy with salt and silence. Joe the boss. Masseria stepped out of his black sedan, his shoes meeting the wet cobblestones with quiet authority. The old Don believed the world still moved for him. That loyalty was measured in years, not opportunity. Behind the tinted glass of nearby cars, eyes were watching. But Masseria didn't see the end coming. He never did. Inside the restaurant, the smell of cigars and red wine filled the room. Lucky Luciano waited by the door. Calm, confident, the student greeting his teacher. They shook hands like old friends, but the grip was colder than ever. To the guests, it looked like respect. To the men who knew, it was the start of a funeral. One neither would admit was already scheduled. They took their seats. Lobster, wine, linen, a meal fit for kings and killers. Masseria spoke of power, of bloodlines, of the old ways that built the Mafia brick by brick. Luciano listened, nodding, his eyes steady, his mind already beyond the table. For every toast raised, another betrayal took shape in the smoke above them. And in that smoke, the old world was already fading. Across town, a young prosecutor named Thomas E. Dewey flipped through files that smelled like dust and danger. He didn't yet know the players' names, but he knew the music: extortion, rackets, murder. He read reports of Joe Masseria, Salvatore Maranzano, and a rising name whispered in the corridors: Charles Lucky Luciano. To Dewey, they weren't legends. They were a case waiting to happen. Outside the restaurant, two men sat in a dark sedan, rain tapping on the windshield. Cigarettes burned to the filter as they watched the door. One lifted binoculars, another checked his watch. Whether they were cops or Luciano's lookouts didn't matter. Everyone was waiting for something. And in the distance, engines idled, ready to move when the signal came. Inside, the laughter turned quiet. Luciano pushed back his chair, adjusting his tie. "Excuse me, Joe," he said softly, stepping away from the table. Masseria nodded, distracted by his wine, unaware that the moment had already been written. Luciano walked toward the restroom, each step sealing a chapter that would never reopen. Seconds later, the restaurant doors opened. 4 men entered, their coats heavy, their eyes colder than the rain outside. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. In a city where silence was sacred, the only sound that mattered was the echo of gunfire. The old Don never saw who pulled the trigger. Maybe he didn't care. His empire ended with the last bite of lobster and the taste of betrayal. Outside, the rain began again. Slow, steady, cleansing. The men walked out calmly, disappearing into the mist like ghosts who had kept their promise. The car doors shut, the engines roared, and New York swallowed the noise. Inside, the table was still set. Half a glass of wine, cards scattered, and a legend gone cold. By morning, the city woke to the headlines: Gangland killing, Joe Masseria slain in Coney Island restaurant. Men in hats read the paper on their way to work, pretending not to stare too long. The underworld had shifted overnight. The king was dead, and his throne belonged to the future. That day marked the end of the old Mafia, the Sicilian code of the mustache Petes who ruled by blood and fear. Luciano had rewritten the rules. He had traded tradition for organization, loyalty for logic. And when the smoke cleared, one truth remained. In a world built on betrayal, the man who moves first always walks away. The streets remember, even when the names fade. Joe Masseria's fall wasn't just another hit, it was the birth of a new order. Lucky Luciano didn't just survive, he reinvented the Mafia itself. If you've made it this far, you're one of us. Hit that like button, subscribe, and welcome to the family. To all our new soldiers, salute. This is Mob Truth, where every story bleeds history.